Welcome to the Queer Thriving Podcast, where we draw inspiration from the past, cultivate thriving in the present, and dream boldly of a better future. Hi, I'm Kari. Any pronouns work for me. I'm glad you're here. In the episode where we discuss the power of grassroots movements initially, we talked about the Black Lives Matter movement because I wanted to refer to something that we had all seen televised and discussed around us, and perhaps even gotten involved in. Now I would like to look back at one particular protest that took place during the AIDS crisis that applied effective pressure to government organizations. On October 10th and 11th in 1988, about 1,500 people descended over the main headquarters of the FDA in Rockville, Maryland. They were protesters who had organized via grassroots movements like Act Now, which stands for AIDS Coalition to Network, Organize, and Win, an unofficial offshoot of the better-known Act Up. And they were there to protest the glacial speed of the FDA's approval process for new medications to treat HIV and AIDS. People were dying quickly, and so the protesters were there to demand that the FDA expedite moving drugs through the approval process, allow broader access to drug trials, and to get official recognition of the urgency of the situation and the need for more government response to this epidemic. At this event, there were speeches, chants, die-ins, we'll get to that in a moment, and even a mock trial, which put the FDA on trial for murder because of their inaction. The die-ins were dramatic versions of sit-ins, but instead of sitting to occupy a space, people would lie down, perhaps smeared with fake blood or red paint handprints to represent how the government had blood on its hands and was just letting people die. Amazingly, this protest and the pressure on the FDA worked. Until this point, drugs took an average of 10 to 15 years to be approved for the market. But with this and other protest efforts, the FDA sped up the process and introduced a new expedited way of approving medications that could get drugs approved in just 1 to 2 years. In the meantime, access to new drugs during the testing phase was opened up considerably, giving people a chance to try new medications when there were really no other options. All this was achieved through events like this one, where a relatively small number of people showed up and made a difference. Since the AIDS crisis disproportionately impacted the queer community, as we know, and was thus seen as a gay people's disease by the culture at large, people could be pretty uncaring and disengaged. Public opinion was pretty homophobic, to say the least. And yet, grassroots groups were still able to apply enough pressure on the powers of the time to force those powers to take action. I cannot overstate just how incredible it was that what all these protesters, advocates, and activists accomplished. I don't know about you, but as I am too young to have experienced the height of the AIDS epidemic in the U.S., or at least too young to have been aware of it, the way I learned about it was in school. We learned that there was this terrible illness that initially had no medication invented yet to treat it, and that people didn't want to help the gay community immediately because of prejudice, but came around eventually, and government efforts to find successful medications for treatment have been ever improving. It completely skated over all the advocacy that pushed that change forward step by painful step. It makes sense if we circle back to Rebecca Solnit's quote that we discussed last time. Ideas at first considered outrageous or ridiculous or extreme gradually become what people think they've always believed. How the transformation happened is rarely remembered, in part because it's compromising. And just how true we see that it is. People just don't want to remember how a whole nation was unconcerned with a terrible disease, killing off tens of thousands of people because they don't want to remember just how callous their homophobia made them. It is amazing how much those activists were able to do. And we can do it again. We can organize and work together and make an impact. One easy thing to do is hop onto the websites of big organizers like GLAAD, the Human Rights Campaign, the Trevor Project, PFLAG, or whatever your favorite advocacy organization is. They all have a link you can click to take action or get involved. You probably have known about these organizations, but I think without hopping on the email lists and following one or two of them closely, you may not know when these types of events are planned for. And if you want to join in and be part of the change, just making yourself aware of what organizations like these are doing is an easy place to start. When it seems like there is so much going wrong, just remember that these groups and many, many others are making real impacts today. State-level anti-trans bills were blocked due to advocacy efforts of these organizations. The Equality Act, passed in the House in 2021, secured protection from discrimination because of sexuality or gender identity. And that happened in part because of the work of the Human Rights Campaign. The Trevor Project's work helped create bans on conversion therapy in Utah and Virginia in 2020. PFLAG was instrumental in passing Massachusetts' Transgender Equal Rights Act all the way back in 2011, which protects trans people from discrimination in employment, housing, education, and more. Of course, there is much work to do, but I just want to give you a spot of hope. We can make a difference. Our voices have made a difference in the past. It just doesn't always seem like that because of the way cultural narratives work. So just remember that grassroots movements and advocacy work do have an impact. We can do this together. And until next time, keep resisting, keep dreaming, and keep thriving.